Hi guys, welcome back to another video, and we're going to have a little chat about why I think that a loop pedal should be one of the first pedals that any guitar player buys. And the guys over at Lekato have sent me one of their affordable loop pedals to try out, so we'll sort of get back to the overview of this later on. But as you learn to play guitar, you make progress, you find songs you like and you learn them, and you feel like you're getting somewhere. And then sooner or later you'll hit the first of many plateaus. You'll just feel like, I'm kind of a bit stuck, and now what? And I think that that is the perfect moment for you to get, maybe it's your first pedal, but definitely a looper pedal. Because when I found myself in that position and got myself a loop pedal, it gave me back that kind of tangible feel of progress and learning again, which then spurs you on to the next time, and you'll hit another plateau, and so on and so on and so on. But a loop pedal is definitely a good thing to have. And the first song I ever learned on a loop pedal that kind of gave me that feeling of progress, being a massive John Frusciante fan, was "Dosed" by by the Chili Peppers. So let's have a little look at that, and then we'll sort of talk about a few more loops and why I think they're useful before we get on to talking about this looper here. So for me, learning Dosed was a great way kind of into looping, because you kind of learn the relationship and the timing between like a basic chord progression in the background and then a lead line on the top, and you're learning kind of the theory but without learning theory, if that makes sense, as to how two certain notes sound right when they're together, and what the timing is, what the kind of push and pull is on the chord progression. And when you first kind of start dialing that in, it just helps you get out of that learning plateau, if you like. You feel like you're making progress. And the kit for that is a looper pedal. And I just think that it's absolutely a brilliant way to kind of feel like you're progressing with your playing while learning at the same time. And then once you've kind of got that dialed in, you can move on to sort of other chord progressions and making up your own chord progressions. I'll show you another one now that I really like. Of course, you've seen it on the channel plenty of times, and that's Wicked Game. That's another brilliant chord progression to loop down and then kind of play over. So that's just a first sort of like look at, the loops that I found helped me when I was reaching those plateaus early on. And it was the loop pedal, using it with those chord progressions, trying to mess around with, improvising different parts, that I felt really kind of made me feel like I was progressing again. And I'm sure that a lot of people have had that exact same thing as well. But that kind of leads us on to talking about this loop pedal in particular. Like I said, Lekato sent me this one to try out. And these, I think, are something to do with the Moore company, but they're sort of the more affordable versions. This pedal is around sort of 45 to 50 quid, something like that. And my first ever loop pedal was the Landlord Effects kind of miniature single button loop pedal. And I found that when you started layering effects on top of it, it kind of lost a lot of clarity. And also, I do prefer a dual button foot switch as well, but we'll come back to that later on. So this one, spec wise, then you notice the screen on the front here. So this doubles up as a tuner as well as monitoring sort of where you are in your loop, what number the stored loop is. You can store up to 3 loops on this. 18 minutes, I think, is the total recording time, and it stores those in WAV files, so you can kind of drag and drop. But that does lead me to my first little criticism of this pedal, and hopefully you can see just there, if it's not too blurred, that port there is a micro USB port. And to me, any product now, micro USB should be long gone. Everything should be USB-C, because you don't want to be messing around with different cables, and USB-C is just so standard to the point where they actually give you a USB-C lead with it. So I'm a little bit confused on that one, because that is definitely micro USB. So that would be sort of my first kind of, I prefer that to be USB-C, but it's kind of not really a big deal. The other thing you should know as well, although it is standard 9-volt power, so any daisy chain power supply, you won't have any issues powering this, but it doesn't come with any kind of power supply. So, and obviously it's too small to be powered by a battery. So something to bear in mind there is make sure you can power it as well. But one thing that kind of took me by surprise with this, the foot switch itself is super soft, and I kind of took that as a sign of maybe, you associate a chunky, hard switch with something nice and quality. And looper pedals I've had in the past with a good switch, I find myself kind of either mispressing them or messing up the loop slightly. And this, I instantly found that the actual act of timing the pressing of the switch, because it's so soft, was just super, super easy. So in this case, I think that's actually a really good thing. Now, I do prefer a 2-button foot switch looper. I think that's the way to go. I do totally understand that a lot of people just get, a single button one. I know plenty of people with a single button looper. And I just think that a dual button it's just a little bit easier to use, especially when you stop. On the intro jam at the start, you might have seen me trying to end it and fluff in the stop, because you got to kind of double tap it. But what this does, and this actually marks it out, so just bear with me a second, is as you're doing your first loop, so you press the loop, you're playing your first kind of baseline loop, if you like. When you then stop it, it doesn't automatically go into record mode for the first time. So when you stop it, that's your first loop, and it's automatically in play mode. Now, I think with the Boss, that's the other way around. So if you stop it and then you play something and slightly mess up, you kind of got to stop and start all over again. Whereas this will default into just play mode. And that might sound ridiculous, but trust me, that is a real cool thing. When you go into subsequent dubbing modes though, and then you're recording that loop through, as it then restarts the loop when you're dubbing, it carries on layering up the recording until you tell it to stop. It's such a simple little thing, but it really works well. And given that you just got one foot switch to work with, that's the best use of a single foot switch that I've seen. But again, I would stress, if you want to get one and kind of you don't mind shelling out a little bit more, a dual one is definitely my preference, especially if you're going to use it live as well. You really do want at least a dual one. And the EHX 720 is I think the best entry level kind of dual foot switch looper. But I mentioned before, this thing also has a tuner on the screen, and I'll just say now that my personal view on any affordable gear is I don't really buy into this. Is it good for the price? Because to me, if something's real cheap and you want to buy it, but all it actually does is take that 40, 50, 60 pound that you've spent on the cheap one and add it because you still want the better one. If it just adds the cost of it onto the already expensive one, to me, that's just not good value. It's actually expensive because you've just made the one you want even more money. So I'm always a little bit kind of skeptical with products like this. But I have to say, hand on heart, I wouldn't be filming this otherwise. I haven't been asked to film it. That if you are looking for a cheap looper and you're looking at the Landlord Effects ones or some of the the simple miniature looper pedals, I would absolutely recommend getting one of these instead. Off camera, I have ran it into the front of an amp as well, because it's always like that highlights weaknesses in a looper, but it's also very amp dependent, but this thing took it really well. The level control is always highly independent of whatever's going into it, and I don't find that's the case all the time. Sometimes they interfere with each other a little bit. But I do want to test the tuner on it. So what I'm going to do now is cut to a clip where I've got my Boss TU3 and I'm sort of tuning the guitar with it and then comparing how that is to this, to this readout sort of thing. Because if the tuner's inaccurate, then the fact that it's a 2-in-1 looper tuner is redundant to me. So let's have a quick look at that. So T3, that's as good as in tune. Let's swap to this one. Yeah, it's reading basically exactly the same because that was flicking back. Let's go to the next one. So, I mean, that's telling me that the tuner in this is easily as good as that. And if you trust these, there's no reason not to trust these. So that's a good thing. Just want to jump in with one more thing about the tuner there. So it's accessed with this little button up here. You press and hold that down for 3 seconds and then that brings up the tuner. And it is very possible to get to that with your foot, but it's sort of less than ideal, which comes back to the 2-switch thing that I was saying about earlier. Would be easier to kind of get something going with that. But, it is accessible. I just thought it'd be worth mentioning that, a tuner pedal is the whole point. It's at your feet, and that is kind of at your feet. So, I mean, assuming you consider a Boss TU3 to be, an accurate tuner, pedal tuner, this thing was equally as accurate as that. And, for someone just starting out and they're, looking to put together a board, and a tuner and a looper are often early purchases, and the fact that this is both of them in one, it's a shame they don't do a 2-button one, because I'd really be keen to try that. If you're watching, try and get a 2-button version out, just a step above, and I think that would be the perfect looper at that point. But I will link where you can get it down below. It is not an affiliate link. It makes no odds to me whether you click it or not, but there's so many affordable loop pedals out there, and it's kind of nice to know that at least one of them is pretty damn good. So hopefully you enjoyed the video, and I will see you again very, very soon.